The classical film noir era in Hollywood lasted from the 1940s to the late 1950s. Film noir has an importance and impact on the history of film, not only Hollywood style, but also European style cinema. Film noir is a cinematic term used primarily to describe stylish Hollywood crime dramas, particularly those that emphasize cynical attitudes and sexual motivations. Hollywood's classic film noir period is generally regarded as stretching from the early 1940s to the late 1950s. Film noir of this era is associated with the low-key black and white visual style that has roots in German expressionist cinematography. Many of the prototypical stories and much of the attitude of classic noir derive from the hard-boiled school of crime fiction that emerged in the United States during the Great Depression. The term film noir, French for black film, describing this style, was first coined by French critic Nino Frank in 1946. Film noirs encompass a range of plots. The central figure may be a private eye, such as in The Big Sleep.
Can I help you, sir?
Oh, yeah, I'm looking for a good mystery on something off the beaten track, like the Maltese Falcon.
Oh, that was a fascinating story. But here's one that has everything the Falcon had and more.
My home
A plainclothes policeman in The Big
Get rid
Heat.
of him. Let's go, mister.
An aging boxer in The Setup. A hapless grifter in The Night in the City.
Younger, stronger, healthier than he is. We've got more life in our little fingers than he has in the whole of his body. Oh, Harry, darling, we must have got to get away from him.
A law-abiding citizen lured into a life of crime in Gun Crazy.
He had an idea he would get the first shot.
Or simply a victim of circumstance, such as in DOA.
Where was this murder committed? San Francisco, last night. Who was murdered? I was.
Though the noir mode was originally identified among American productions, films now customarily described as noir have been made around the world. From the 1960s onward, many pictures have come out that share attributes with film noirs of the classic period, often treating noir conventions in a self-reflexive manner. Such latter-day works in a noir mode are often referred to as neo-noirs. The tropes of film noir have inspired parody since the mid-40s, such as in Naked Gun. Elements of film noir are also used in some of today's modern-day films, such as several of Tim Burton's films, like Alice in Wonderland. Film noir came from and was heavily influenced by an early movement called German Expressionism, which reached its peak in the 1920s in Berlin. This movement was birthed from a larger expressionist movement which existed in the early decades of the 20th century in Germany and Austria. German Expressionism was defined by its dark nature, both visually and thematically, with hard, striking lighting forming strong contrast and strong shadows, and a focus on murder, death, and other such themes. German Expressionism, both in film and other media, produced a dark, cold, and in a sense surreal look and feel. Adding to this was the tendency to use exaggerated and distorted imagery to portray the world not as it truly is, but as the subject perceives it, allowing the viewer an almost uncomfortably close look into the mind of the character. This style was certainly influenced by the remnants of the dark and surreal images of the First World War. Many of film noir's distinct styles, including black and white picture with low-key lighting elements, find their roots in the German Expressionism movement. German Expressionism began to grow in the years before World War I. After the Great War, Germany was isolated from the rest of the world. Foreign films were banned in Germany, increasing the demand for more domestic films. Due to this isolation, German Expressionism peaked in the early 1920s and became widely acknowledged in the international film industry. Another factor which contributed to German Expressionism was the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party in 1937. The Nazi Party destroyed many pieces of artwork as Hitler did not like the idea of creativity. Although he himself was an artist, Hitler referred to this kind of art as degenerate art and made an exhibition which consisted of this art to show people what he considered an insult to German integrity. In order to escape the Nazis, directors fled to America in the 1930s and directed movies that were experimenting with the style passed down from German Expressionism. The dream sequence from Stranger on the Third Floor is a good example of the influence of German Expressionism on American film noir style. During the World War, many Germans left to find jobs in America. Due to the restriction on imports including foreign films in Germany around the time of the First World War, German artists and movie makers suffered from prolonged stylistic isolation, eventually developing their own creative style, which was unique and experimental. So when German immigrants produced films in America, the end result was wildly different to the previous American released films. For example, lighting at the hands of a German movie maker was likely to be characteristically dark and harsh. As well as World War II, which affected global attitudes in the early 1940s, one influence on the American artistic attitudes even earlier than this throughout the 1930s was the Great Depression of the United States of America. Shadows, low-key lighting, deep focus, and flashbacks add to the atmosphere of noir that is gloomy and depressing. Film noir takes ordinary people and places them in the reality of a corrupt American society. Noir films were highly influenced by the anxiety of the Great Depression and further expressed imagery of World War II. These two time periods built the foundation and support of film noir. It was during this time that the notion of the American dream was erased from existence. Films such as Orson Welles' 1941 film Citizen Kane and Double Indemnity, directed by Billy Wilder in 1944, provide themes of the failed American dream and furthermore express the difficulty of interpreting life. These themes are common in most noir films and further express why audiences had an emotional connection to them. While exploring the historical aspects of the Great Depression and World War II, film noir served as an outlet for individuals to experience mutual feelings with the characters on the big screen and develop an aspiration for a perfect American society, which ultimately became non-existent. The Great Depression and World War II are events that caused American society to crumble. This era brings a spectator closer to the fears and emotions that film noir created. These feelings of anxiety are predominantly expressed through the characters. The repressions of American society are expressed through the narratives of classic noir films and depict characters struggling for some sort of freedom. The montage scene in Citizen Kane serves as an excellent example for this. Pessimistic behavior trends from the aftermath of the Great Depression, which could be nothing more than an outlook on life. A further influence on film noir was Prohibition. Prohibition refers to the period in United States history spanning from 1920 to 1933, during which the 18th Amendment of the US Constitution outlawed the production and transportation of alcoholic beverages. Ironically, this drove Americans to producing alcohol themselves and illegally consuming beverages in hidden locations known as speakeasies. During this time, alcohol consumption was at its highest in US history. This illegal activity promoted the use of wine and other such beverages, as well as cigarettes and cigars in film noir films, hence the mise-en-scène of glasses of wine and the popular setting of a pub where detectives often gathered and fights occurred. The recurring theme of crime in film noir was also influenced by the rise of crime rates during this period, following the uprising of organized crime gangs taking advantage of the situation to peddle alcohol and corrupt figures of authority. Hence the theme of corruption and, to an extent, paranoia in film noir. A notable figure during this time is Al Capone. Another influence on film noir was chiaroscuro. This stands for the Italian words bright, chiaro, and dark, oscuro. Often associated with German Expressionism and film noir, chiaroscuro refers to strong contrasts between light and dark. A common thread of film noir lighting is low-key lighting, a style called chiaroscuro which emphasizes shadow and hard lighting to create a sense of depth and volume is often used in paintings to create a bold image. The strong contrast in German Expressionism paintings and films is an example of chiaroscuro in practice. This technique is prominent in the film noir style through low-key lighting, and to achieve the effect, hard lights which leave sharp-edged shadows are used, creating a bold contrast between light and dark. This style of filming, using minimal lighting, was practical in the era of film noir, as films following this style tended to be low-budget, grade B movies, and directors sought to minimize costs. This helped to contribute to the characteristic style of film noir, as did the use of relatively rudimentary techniques. An example is Q coloris, often called cookies. These are cutouts of wood, metal, plastic, or whatever was practical and available that cast a patterned shadow on the scene, defining the film noir aesthetic. The era of film noir coincided with the start of the Cold War. This term is used to describe the relationship between America and the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1980. Despite the word war, neither side ever fought each other, both fearing that the consequences would be appalling. While both nations' military power grew, tensions between the two rose, and not only the risk, but the potential consequences of a war followed. This fear of mutually assured destruction for both sides built a strong feeling of paranoia in the people's culture and attitude. This influenced directors who reflected this paranoia in their work, building a strong sense of paranoia in the film noir style, which grew to become a convention. One further influence on the film noir style was Black Mask magazines. The Black Mask magazine was a magazine first published by an intellectual man by the name of H.L. Mencken in 1920, in which a variety of stories were written. What made Black Mask magazine stand out from the others was that many other successful writers were writing for the magazine, such as Earl Stanley Gardner. They were so successful that many other writers strived to be there too, writing for Black Mask, which inspired many at the time. Black Mask magazine creates the character of a private eye, which is one of the most important developments in the history of mystery fiction in America, and that's why Black Mask magazines had a huge influence on film noir, as it replicated many of the codes and conventions. It was becoming clear by the time of the film noir era that the medium of film was a very powerful tool with a strong influence on its audience. Naturally, many feared the potential this had, including the church. Worried that this meant severe intervention, the studios of Hollywood elected to self-regulate to prevent upsetting the church. A postmaster general named Will H. Hayes was hired to do this, producing the Motion Picture Production Code of 1930, colloquially known as the Hayes Code.
The code sets up high standards of performance for motion picture producers. It states the considerations which good taste and community value make necessary in this universal form of entertainment. Respect for law, respect for every religion, respect for every race, and respect for every nation.
This restricted the big screen and consequently limited film companies, who were then forced to hint at or imply many of the more mature themes of the film noir movies, adding to the mysterious and enigmatic tone of the style. As competition from television became a threat to movie makers, directors responded by increasing focus on mature themes, such as crime and sex, to outcompete television, leading to the code eventually being totally abandoned.